to me on this side and you're on that side, but I maybe have ruined it. I don't know. Brad is, I would argue, one of the deepest thinkers on some of these really intractable issues and on the intersection of business and policy in a way that maybe people don't appreciate. Brad really began his career at Microsoft in the 1990s in the midst of Microsoft's long and bitter challenge over antitrust issues. And he spent a lot of time here, and I am thrilled to have him. I should also tell you he has a new book out, which I believe everybody here is going to get a copy of. It's called Tools and Weapons, The Promise and the Peril of the Digital Age. And it's a fantastic read, but it also really gets to a lot of the issues that we're going to discuss. So thank you, Brad, for being here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
What I want to do, and by the way, we're going to make this. I'm going to ask him a handful of questions, and we're going to talk for a bit. But we want to open this up to the room, and we want this whole day to be interactive. But here's where I want to start. The world of technology and Silicon Valley has clearly been now, or it now feels like it's in the crosshairs of Washington and regulators in a way that it has never been before, perhaps in Europe, but not to that same extent. And the question I had for you is, having lived through the past 10, if not 20 years, and the turnaround of Microsoft and everything else, I imagine you get phone calls, and you see other executives at rival companies, and I'm thinking of Facebook, and I'm thinking of Apple, and I'm thinking of Google, and I'm even thinking of your neighbor, Amazon. And I wonder, when you see people like Jeff Bezos in Seattle, or if these people call you or you see them, what you would tell them now? Meaning, I assume they must come to you occasionally, or you're having conversations. How do you get in front of this? What would you say, given your experience, that they should be doing?
Well, of course, in any industry, people's paths cross. So you do see people, you talk to them on the phone and the like, and without diving into the details of any particular person or company, I think that there's a few things that people always need to think about, and some of them we're very transparent about in our book. I think the first thing you have to step back and think about is, why are these issues, and why is this company in this situation? And to a very large degree, it's because technology is changing the world. And also, as we chose the title for the book that Carolyn Brown and I wrote, technology has become a tool and a weapon. It is creating rise to so many broad societal concerns. But then what we learned, what I've been comfortable sharing privately and publicly, is that I think the hardest thing for anybody in this position is you have to step back, and you basically have to learn to look yourself in the mirror and not see what you want to see, but what other people see. And you have to really get out and listen to them, appreciate their concerns about you. I actually think you have to acknowledge the problems, because until you acknowledge the problems, you can't solve them, and nobody is going to believe that you're trying.
But can I ask a question about that, acknowledging the problem? So right now, the Silicon Valley is in a very defensive posture. I think that's probably fair to say. And so the question is, if you're a Google, or if you're an Apple, there was an article in the New York Times just this week about whether Apple was placing its own apps at a higher in the App Store than everybody else's, right? Which, by the way, I think is, you could make the parallel with some of the issues that Microsoft was dealing with when it comes to the web browser war back in the day. To acknowledge up front that, yes, we've done this and it's a problem, does that create more of a problem or not?
It does both. Having lived through it in the 90s, having been a lawyer, being still a lawyer, at least in part of what I do, you really have to take very carefully all your advice from the lawyers. That's the first thing I would say. Because there's actually a real tension between avoiding a statement that a lawyer will say will constitute an admission, and saying things that, frankly, everybody knows to be true and put you on the path to solving a problem. And as I argue inside Microsoft, anytime such issues arise, in the long run, you're better served by solving the problem than by trying to win a lawsuit. And the two obvious analogies that you can look back at Microsoft were, we wouldn't admit that Windows was in a monopoly position. the court had no trouble saying, of course it's a monopoly product. And so it didn't actually help us in the legal case, and we suffered a lot of credibility issues. The other thing is when you engage in a course correction, you either have to say, you know what, we were wrong and we listened and we learned and so we've done something to make it right. Or you can say, there was never a problem, we just decided to make something better. And people are attuned to this. They're actually trying to suss out the fundamental question that was asked of us and will be asked of any business of any size in any situation. It's actually a simple one. Do you get it? Do you get the concerns that we have? And unless you let them know that you do, I actually think it's really hard to build the kind of trust.
The reason I ask that is, how do you do it if you think it's fundamental to your business model and to the product itself? And the reason I ask that is, I think you look at what's happening at Google, for example, or even Apple, or even Amazon. They would say to you that it is fundamental that we control the App Store. It is fundamental that we be able to actually list the search results how we're doing it. It's fundamental for our marketplace on Amazon to work the way we think it is supposed to. And that it's actually better for the product that way. Maybe not for the consumer, and that becomes the question.
Well, I think you ask the right question, which is really people have to decide what is fundamental. For us, it was fundamental to be able to continue to innovate and develop new features that would make Windows at the time a better product. Did that mean it was fundamental to control how it was licensed to PC manufacturers? Was it fundamental to determine how we would market it in certain ways? Was it fundamental that certain information would be kept secret or public? At one level, if you are extraordinarily risk averse, everything in life can be fundamental. But if everything in life is fundamental, then that's probably a clue that maybe you're applying the word more broadly than you should. If something truly is fundamental, then you need to explain why and how even when it is fundamental, you are pursuing your fundamental goals, I think, in a way that is not just serving your company, but your customers and society.
So Chris Hughes, famously one of the founders of Facebook, wrote an op-ed and is now, I believe, working with the Department of Justice, arguing that Facebook should be broken up. And part of his argument isn't just the monopoly issue. It's actually relates to privacy. And I believe that his viewpoint is even broader than just Facebook itself. It's all of big tech. What do you think of that? Well, in terms of the way we even look at antitrust in America today.
I think it's a really important question. And I'm not here or anywhere else advocating that anybody be broken up or sued for that matter. I do think one of the more interesting developments in antitrust law has been people, first from a scholarly perspective, and now the head of the Justice Department Antitrust Division, embracing a broader approach. For many years, the prevailing theory was that the only kind of harm that mattered, that was relevant in the world of antitrust, was purely economic harm, which fundamentally tended to relate either to driving people out of business or preventing them from entering, or prices rising, with prices being the ultimate test. And this new school of thought, which I think is a logical one, is that actually, given the role of technology in society, we do need to think about the impact on our privacy. We need to think about it in terms of the impact on our democracy, right, perhaps more than anything else. And so there is more in the world of antitrust than economics alone.
You had a meeting with President Obama in the Oval Office in 2013. You write about it. But I think it's probably worth sharing blow by blow to the room, which is that he effectively said this was coming for Silicon Valley. What happened?
Well, it was a fascinating meeting, and we tell the story, Carol Ann and I do in our book. It was in December of 2013, just basically a week before the holidays. And it brought together just over a dozen of the tech leaders, household names, people everybody would recognize. And it was all about the Snowden disclosures. And we were there for a very particular purpose. which was to make the case to President Obama, Vice President Biden, the senior staff at the White House, that there needed to be more checks and balances on the data that was in the hands of the NSA. And as tended to happen, people went around the room, and there was a moment when President Obama, in addition to listening very thoughtfully and frankly having clearly thought very deeply about these issues, made a different point. He said, "I have a suspicion that the guns will turn." He said, "All of you have more data about people than the government does. And the kinds of demands that you are making on the government when it comes to privacy will eventually be made on you." I wrote it down. I didn't write that much down in that meeting, but I wrote that down because I thought at the time that it was prescient. We long thought that the day would eventually come. I gave a speech in 2005 on Capitol Hill advocating for a national privacy law. Everybody just ignored it. What I always thought was that their privacy would be quiet until it became loud. And as we say in the book, in a way, Cambridge Analytica in 2018 became the 3-mile island for data and privacy and technology, meaning suddenly people woke up and almost overnight the political climate changed.
So here's my next tech question, which is, what do you think it means to be a patriotic company in America today? And the reason I ask this question is because we have a number of big tech companies, and I think that this is all part of a big stew, by the way, in terms of what's happening with policy and how Washington's even looking at some of these companies, who have said, we don't want to do business with the government. And I'm thinking of Google on Maven. You've seen the protests at Amazon. There are things going on in this country that are different than they used to be. You, by the way, are participating in a project with Washington State, where I believe on facial recognition, that some people would put in the kind of conversation of being controversial. So where is the line, and when is a company supposed to say, I'm doing this with the government, or I'm not?
It is a fundamental question that I don't think is something that one answers with a singular approach to everything, but I can give you a very concrete example that reflects how we thought about it. And frankly, again, it's something we talk about in our book. We asked ourselves, what would we provide to the Pentagon? And the answer is everything we make. We feel it is our responsibility as an American company to ensure that people who are literally putting their lives at risk to defend our country have the best technology that we create for them. But that's step one. Step two is we've also said, in a democracy like this one, we have a voice. We have a corporate voice. And it is right that we think about the broader ethical and policy issues that the use of technology in the military can raise. What does it mean to deploy artificial intelligence for weapons systems? These are fundamentally important questions for the future. And so we said we would engage, we would think, we would meet, we'll be public. And I think that, in our view, is the right approach in a democratic nation.
Well, let me ask you this. You also write about an experience where an advisor to President Trump talks to you, I think, about using Microsoft to spy elsewhere in the world, to which you say, no. What happened?
Well, this relates to another aspect of what it means, I think, to be thoughtful in a democratic nation. First of all, we all live and are fully committed, I think, to the rule of law and the protection of certain liberties that are enshrined in our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And those rights are not rights that are enjoyed by Americans alone. There are certain fundamental rights, human rights, that in fact are enshrined in a global set of principles and even documents that have been endorsed by our own government. So what we've also made clear in a wide variety of contexts is, even for our own government, or for that matter for any government, we won't voluntarily sacrifice the human rights of our customers. we have to put that first above all else.
Okay, but let's speak to that, because so on one end, you're willing to give the technology over to the Pentagon. On the other end, we had this situation with Apple in San Bernardino several years ago, and the phone that the government desperately wanted to be opened, and you took the side of Apple.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I would say what this really points to is two distinct things. There is access to technology, and there is access to people's data. We create technology. We are prepared to provide it to the United States government. There may be times that if the US uses technology in a way that we think runs afoul of the law, we will use our voice. We sued the Obama administration 4 times over the surveillance issues. Now, when you get to people's data, the first principle is, unlike the technology we create, the data that people store in our cloud does not belong to us. We are not the owner of it. It is their data. It is our customers' data. And our first responsibility, actually, in our view, is to ensure that their rights in their data are preserved.
Okay, let me make it a little more complicated. You have a founder named Bill Gates who is very anxious about the issue of encryption. Mm-hmm. He is very worried, talks quite openly, and has implied at least that he was not necessarily on board with the view of Microsoft when it came to that Apple phone. And it's not clear, and he has real concerns that in a world where everything is end-to-end encrypted, when Facebook encrypts its entire system, that actually it's creating an even bigger problem.
And first of all, you're absolutely right that there's a variety of views. I think there is
It's a polite way to put it.
Yeah, no, there's a thorny set of questions around encryption that will continue to merit thoughtful conversation. There are certain propositions that we would sign up for readily, and then there are aspects for which there should be more conversation. For us, the right answer is not to create back doors. I've said before, the path to hell begins at the back door of a software product, because if you create that, you basically undermine people's security and privacy. But there is a broader set of issues that is the kind of thing that needs discussion. One is, we've lived in a country since the late 1700s that has ensured that law enforcement can get access to the information it needs to investigate a crime and keep the public safe, pursuant to the rule of law and the protection of the Fourth Amendment. And now, you have technology as potentially being an impediment to the effective exercise of that longstanding right and value. How do we reconcile this? Now, I've just framed the Gordian knot. I haven't tried to cut it, but I think that's the conversation we need to have.
Okay. I have a handful more questions, and I do want to open it up to the room. Huawei. We're going to be talking to the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, later this afternoon. And Huawei is clearly a centerpiece of this trade battle or fight, or at least has become a chess piece in the negotiation. I saw you made some comments recently that seemed to suggest that you were actually quite more supportive of Huawei than most technology executives I've seen.
Well, I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole, because we didn't think that the comments were accurately reported. But setting that aside, what I would say is this, and it's why I think one of the hardest chapters to write in the book is the chapter we wrote about U.S. and China. From a technology perspective, this is a critical relationship and set of issues that needs to be approached with an understanding of the details and nuances involved. When you specifically get to issues like 5G, there is good reason for this or other countries to apply certain national security controls that may in fact limit or restrict access by suppliers from other countries. But at the same time, we need to step back and recognize, in our view, that if we embark on a wholesale policy of, in effect, trying to create a new digital Iron Curtain down the Pacific Ocean, and we stop American companies from working with other companies or researchers, or we stop the export of American technology to companies in other countries, we are more likely to hold ourselves back
Okay,
than hold others
let me
back.
play this out. Do you think that Huawei is a national security threat? Full stop.
I don't think it is my job to evaluate whether it is a company is a threat. It is an important issue, and I leave it to the people in the national
let me push it
security
one other way
community
then.
to draw that conclusion.
Help me with this distinction, though, okay? There's a view, to the degree that you believe it's a national security threat, you would make the argument that at some point, President Xi or the Chinese leadership could go to the CEO of Huawei and say, look, you have these devices and radios planted all over the world, and they all have to call home base at some point to get updated, and we'd now like you to use that update effectively to help us spy or learn about whatever it is. How is that different in truth? And what would happen if the Trump administration or somebody from the Pentagon called you or called Satya and said, hey, we have a situation in wherever it is, and we know that you have so many Microsoft devices or Microsoft software in these devices. Can you help us?
Yeah. Well, let me answer the question as you're a good enough journalist to recognize at this point that I'm more likely to talk about Microsoft than some other company. The questions that you just raised are put to us all the time by countries and governments around the world. And that's why we have been very clear and principled about the things that we will and will not do. We recognize that we don't live in a world where governments are inclined to just take anybody's word for things. They want you to be put to the test. That's why we've created what are called transparency centers around the world so that governments can come and actually, in a secure environment, inspect our code and be confident that they're not deploying products that could be used in a way that would put their fundamental sovereignty or their people's rights at risk. One point I would make is the nationality of technology matters, but it is not the only way, and no one's really suggesting it is, but it's not the only way to regulate the security issues around technology. There are rules around transparency, about inspection. There are a variety of ways to regulate these products. And if there's anything that I would hope everyone should agree on, it's that when you have multiple tools, you should think about how to use all of them and not just one of them.
Okay. Two final questions, and then we'll try to take a couple of questions that we're getting a note that you may have to depart soon. Here's where I want to go. Meredith mentioned this BRT letter, Business Roundtable letter. You guys are not part of the Business Roundtable.
We're not a member.
Not a member, but I know you were behind the scenes on that, and I want to understand this idea of profit and purpose a little bit and try to keep it from being a cliche. But I will say you're one of the few companies, and this part of the conversation may be part of some of these task forces later. For example, Microsoft, you guys have an internal carbon tax inside your company. Washington State recently moved towards free and reduced college tuition because Microsoft and Amazon were helping fund it. You're involved, by the way, I should say, with the seed-to-sale cannabis program. I don't know if you're familiar with the cannabis program that Microsoft signed on to.
I'm actually not.
But it relates to all of this. But I think the larger question I would ask you is, do you think this is all PR and it's about assuaging Washington and the public or to protect the profits, or is it really something else?
I think it is something else, and it is something big, and I think it's important. And I think it is actually of fundamental importance to the expectations that the world has for companies in the 21st century. I think that the BRT statement, which we strongly support, is really worth studying and thinking about, not just in terms of the different stakeholders, but one of the things I liked so much about it was even the ordering of them. Certainly when you are thinking about technology, when you are thinking about people putting their data in your data center, meaning in the cloud, I believe you should put customers first. And I will argue every day that if you care about long-term value creation, the best way to serve your shareholders is to serve your customers. Think, as I've said in this book, think about a tech company in 2019 the way you've probably thought about a bank your whole life. You deposit your money with a bank, the first thing you expect is that you can go get your money back when you want it. You put your data with a tech company, you expect that data to be safe, private, and secure. And the day that we forget that we owe our first responsibility to our customers is the day we put ourselves on a path to ultimately be talking about shareholders, talking with shareholders about value that's declining, not growing.
Okay. Brad Smith, thank you for the conversation. I'm told if you read that right there,
It says no questions,
no
have
questions
to wrap.
after wrap. Can I keep you here for just a minute more?
I'm sure that someone will go apoplectic, but why not?
Okay. Can we just get one or two questions real quick? I know I'm going to get killed by people, but I do.
You ask fast, I'll answer fast.
You have your own plane, right? It's not like
No, it's across town to the Treasury Department.
Oh, okay. Well, that explains that. Any quick questions? They can only be good questions. I don't know if we have any. I don't see any.
Yeah, there's somebody pointing there. Yeah, it's just hard to see.
Go for it.
Stage.
Hi, Mary Powell from Green Mountain Power in Vermont. So back to the Business Roundtable statement and about your statement about the importance and the credibility of that. Quick question for somebody who's now run a benefit corporation for years, and there are other publicly held benefit corporations already. Why not just join that movement?
Oh, we would love to join the movement. We've asked the BRT if we can sign. You have to be a member. And we may well at some point be a member of the BRT. We're great fans of the organization. I think that there is an opportunity for those of us who are outside the BRT to endorse what the BRT is doing. If there's one thing that I have said, that Satya Nadella, our CEO, has said, is when we read the BRT statement, we feel that this is not only a statement that we endorse, but a description of the way we have been managing our company over the last 5 years. And if you look at Microsoft over the last 5 years, it became the most valuable company on the planet, measured by market capitalization. So to us, there's a little bit of perhaps a false dichotomy between customers and employees on the one hand and shareholders on the other. This is a multi-stakeholder world. The best way to serve shareholders is actually to embrace all the stakeholders we need to serve.
Okay. We're going to leave the conversation there. We're going to have you come back next year to continue this conversation.
I'll be back.
Say hi to the Treasury Secretary for us, and you can warn him in advance about what's going to happen later. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you all.
Thank
See
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I go this way.
After you. So here's what we're going to do now. We are going to break into a series of these task forces